What if everything you thought you knew about your family was a lie? Imagine one day, your child comes home from school with an incredible story, claiming they've met someone who looks exactly like them. At first, you brush it off, thinking it's just childish imagination. But then, you see it with your own eyes. The resemblance is undeniable. How could this be possible? A secret twin? A hidden past? Or something even more shocking? As one mother begins to unravel the truth, her life and her family are turned upside down. What starts as an innocent claim quickly spirals into a journey filled with secrets, betrayal, and the unbreakable bond of love. But what happens when the truth finally comes to light? And how far would you go to protect the ones you love? Stay with us as we uncover a story you won't soon forget. But before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from. And if today's story warms your heart during this cold winter season, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming and emotional stories. Now, let's begin this journey together. The sun dipped low behind the golden horizon, casting streaks of warm amber light through the windows of a modest two-story house. Boxes sat scattered across the living room floor, half unpacked and brimming with the remnants of the family's old life. Laura pressed a hand to her lower back, stretching the ache out of her tired muscles as she surveyed the room. Moving was never easy, but she reminded herself that this house marked a fresh start for her family, a peaceful home where laughter could echo through its walls. "Mom!" Ethan's voice rang out like a burst of energy, breaking Laura's quiet moment. She turned to see her son bounding down the stairs, his sneakers squeaking against the hardwood. At 10 years old, Ethan seemed to carry an endless reservoir of excitement, his messy blonde hair flopping over his forehead as he skidded to a stop in front of her. He flashed a gap-toothed grin, eyes alight with the kind of sparkle only childhood wonder could create. "Hey, slow down there, kiddo," Laura teased with a soft chuckle, brushing dust off her jeans. "What's got you in such a hurry?" Ethan beamed, practically bouncing on his toes. "I have to tell you what happened at school today." Laura raised an eyebrow and sank onto the arm of the couch. "All right, I'm listening. Did you win a spelling bee or something?" "No, it's way cooler than that," Ethan exclaimed, his voice rising with excitement. "I met someone who looks exactly like me. His name's Mason. And Mom, he could be my twin." Laura blinked, momentarily thrown off by the wild declaration. "Your twin?" she repeated with a smile tugging at her lips. "Honey, I think you just found a look-alike. It happens sometimes. People can look similar." Ethan shook his head fervently, his small hands flailing for emphasis. "No, Mom, you don't get it. Mason's not just similar. He's exactly like me. We have the same hair, the same nose, even the same eyes. And when we talked at recess, our voices sounded the same, too." Laura stifled a laugh as she stood up, ruffling Ethan's hair affectionately. "You've got quite the imagination, bud. Maybe Mason's just your doppelganger." "What's a doppelganger?" Ethan asked, scrunching his face in confusion. "Doppelganger," Laura corrected, smiling at his innocence. "It's just a fancy word for someone who looks like you, but isn't related." "But what if we are related?" Ethan pressed, his voice lowering as if sharing a secret. "What if we got separated when we were babies, like in a movie?" Laura let out a small sigh, recognizing that her son's imagination had taken off. He had always been the type to dream big, often crafting elaborate adventures or coming home with stories that made her laugh. She knelt to his level, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Ethan, listen to me," she said softly. "I know meeting someone who looks like you must feel exciting, but life isn't like the movies. Your dad and I would know if you had a twin, wouldn't we?" Ethan's shoulders slumped, his earlier excitement dimming just a little. "But, no buts," Laura interrupted kindly, tilting his chin up so he could see her reassuring smile. "I promise you, there's only one you. You're unique, and that's what makes you so special." Ethan nodded reluctantly, though his expression showed he wasn't ready to let the thought go completely. "Okay," he mumbled, shuffling back toward the stairs. As Laura watched him disappear to his room, a flicker of doubt lingered in her mind. It wasn't the first time Ethan had spun a far-fetched tale, but something about the way he spoke this time unsettled her. There was no hint of exaggeration or make-believe in his voice. Only certainty, like he truly believed every word. Shaking her head, Laura tried to brush off the thought. Kids always saw magic where adults couldn't, she reasoned. Moving to a new house and a new school had probably overwhelmed Ethan. And maybe meeting someone who looked like him was his way of coping with the change. Still, later that evening, as the house settled into a quiet hum, Laura found herself replaying Ethan's words. We have the same hair, the same nose, even the same eyes. The excitement in his voice had been so real, so insistent that it tugged at her heart. What if he wasn't just imagining things? No, she thought firmly. It was just a coincidence. The world was full of lookalikes, after all. Upstairs, Ethan sat on his bed, clutching a crumpled drawing he'd made after school. A stick-figure version of himself and Mason, side by side, identical smiles drawn in heavy pencil. Staring at the picture, Ethan whispered to himself, I'll prove it. You'll see, Mom. I'm not making it up. Outside the window, a deep hush settling over the quiet neighborhood. In the house that marked a new beginning, no one realized just how much their lives were about to change. The smell of rosemary chicken filled the cozy kitchen as Laura pulled the steaming dish from the oven. Warm golden light spilled from the ceiling lamp, bathing the room in a glow that felt homely and comforting, at least on the surface. She placed the chicken in the center of the dining table, surrounded by a bowl of mashed potatoes, roasted carrots, and fresh bread rolls. Despite the whirlwind of moving, Laura had made it a point to create a sense of normalcy for her family, and tonight's dinner was part of that. Ethan, Michael, dinner's ready, Laura called out, her voice echoing down the hallway. A moment later, Ethan bounded into the room, his face still lit with the same eager excitement he'd carried since school. His hands were smudged with pencil marks, evidence of a drawing session upstairs, but his energy was unflagging. He skidded to a halt in front of the table, pulling out his chair and plopping into it with a grin. What took you so long, Mom? I am starving, Ethan exclaimed dramatically, though his smile betrayed his playfulness. Laura smiled softly as she set out the silverware. I'm not a magician, kiddo. Good food takes time. Now go wash those hands before eating. Fine, eat inside. Hopping up again and sprinting toward the sink in the corner of the kitchen, Laura turned just in time to see Michael enter the room. He looked tired, as he often did after a long day at the office. But something about his expression gave her pause. His jaw seemed tighter, his gaze distant as he dropped his bag by the door and loosened his tie. Hey, honey, Laura said, tilting her head in concern. Rough day. Michael blinked, snapping out of his reverie as he met her gaze with a forced smile. Oh, nothing out of the ordinary. Just the usual grind. He leaned over and kissed her cheek. Dinner smells great. Laura studied him for a moment longer before nodding. Thanks. It's ready, so let's dig in. By the time they sat down, Ethan had returned with freshly washed hands and an undeniable bounce in his step. Laura watched him scoop a mountain of mashed potatoes onto his plate with a determined focus, then glanced at Michael, who was absent-mindedly slicing a piece of chicken. The family ate in relative quiet for the first few minutes, but Ethan couldn't hold back his news any longer. Fork halfway to his mouth, he burst out, Dad, guess what happened at school today? Michael looked up from his plate, startled by the sudden enthusiasm. What's that, bud? I met my twin, Ethan declared, his voice brimming with excitement. His name's Mason, and he looks exactly like me. Same hair, same eyes, same voice, everything. The room seemed to freeze for a moment. Michael's fork clattered against his plate, the sound louder than it should have been. Laura blinked in surprise, turning to look at her husband just in time to catch the way his face went pale. Michael opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out at first. Instead, he swallowed hard and forced an uneasy chuckle. You're a twin? He repeated, his voice uneven. Ethan nodded vigorously. Yeah, everyone at school noticed it too. It's like we're the same person. Michael's hand trembled slightly as he picked up his glass of water, taking a long sip before setting it down. Well, that's unusual, he said, his tone flat. But, lots of people look alike, Ethan. It's probably just a coincidence. Laura frowned as she watched Michael. Something was wrong. Michael's usually calm and easy demeanor had vanished, replaced by a strained nervousness she couldn't remember seeing before. His smile looked forced, and his movements were almost mechanical. "But Dad, it's not just that we look alike," Ethan insisted, his voice rising with frustration. "Mason said his mom doesn't know why we're so similar either. What if we are twins? What if we got separated when we were babies? Mom says that doesn't happen, but what if it did?" Michael's knuckles whitened around his fork, though he tried to keep his expression neutral. "Ethan, you've been watching too many movies," he said abruptly. "That kind of thing doesn't happen in real life." Ethan looked deflated, his excitement ebbing as he turned to Laura. "But Mom, you saw how serious I was earlier. You have to believe me." Laura hesitated, her gaze flicking between her son and her husband, while she wanted to gently dismiss Ethan's claims again. Michael's reaction had thrown her off balance. There was something about the way he was avoiding eye contact, his whole posture stiff and unnatural, that made her pause. "Ethan, I'm sure Mason is just a look-alike," she said slowly, though her words lacked the certainty she'd shown earlier. "But you can tell us more about him after dinner, okay? Why don't you eat up first?" Ethan slumped slightly in his chair, but nodded. "Okay." The rest of dinner was quiet, too quiet. Michael didn't say another word, eating mechanically as though his thoughts were miles away. Laura couldn't help but study him, noticing the way his eyes darted to his plate and his jaw tensed each time Ethan shifted in his seat. By the time they finished, the atmosphere felt heavy and uncomfortable. Michael stood abruptly, clearing his throat. I have some work to finish in the study," he muttered, gathering his plate and disappearing down the hall before Laura could respond. Ethan looked up at his mom, confusion written all over his face. "Did I say something wrong?" Laura smiled weakly, brushing a strand of hair back from his forehead. "No, sweetie. Dad's just tired, that's all. Why don't you go play in your room for a bit while I clean up?" Ethan hesitated but nodded, his footsteps dragging as he left the kitchen. Once Laura was alone, she sank into a chair, her mind racing. Michael's reaction had been far from normal, almost as though Ethan's story had struck a nerve. Why would he look so unsettled about something so harmless? She replayed the scene in her mind. His pale face, the trembling hands, the quick escape. A tight knot formed in her chest as a troubling thought crept into her mind. What if Ethan wasn't imagining things? What if there really was more to this story? Laura shook her head, trying to push the idea away. It was absurd. Michael was probably just tired from work, and Ethan's imagination had run away with him, as it always did. But deep down, the seed of doubt had already been planted. And as Laura washed the dishes, the sound of running water drowned out the quiet whisper of her thoughts, thoughts that refused to be ignored. Something wasn't right, and for the first time, Laura wondered if her son's fantastical story might hold more truth than she was ready to believe. The next morning, the hallways of Oakwood Elementary were alive with the chatter of excited students. Today was class photo day, a yearly tradition that always sent the kids into a frenzy of giggles, outfit adjustments, and hurried combing of wayward hair. Ethan sat at his desk in room 4B, tapping his pencil against his notebook as the buzz around him filled the air. Normally, class photo day wasn't something to get excited about, but today was different. Today was important. Across the room, Mason Parker sat in his usual seat near the window, absent-mindedly fiddling with the edge of his math book. It was uncanny just how much Mason looked like Ethan. Same mop of messy, chestnut brown hair, same green eyes that sparkled with mischief. Even the same slightly crooked smile. The resemblance had already become the talk of the class. Ethan couldn't stop glancing at Mason, his mind racing. If Mom and Dad don't believe me, maybe they'll believe a photo. The thought had struck him late the night before, keeping him awake as he pieced together a plan. The class photo would be the proof they needed, evidence that he and Mason weren't just lookalikes, but something much more. Twins. Psst. Mason. Ethan hissed under his breath, trying to get his friend's attention. Mason looked up, his curious expression turning into a grin when he saw Ethan waving him over. Miss Carter, their teacher, was busy at the chalkboard, explaining fractions with her back to the class, giving the boys their chance. Mason grabbed his pencil and scooted his desk closer with a soft scrape. "What's up?" Mason whispered, leaning in. Ethan looked around, making sure no one was listening before lowering his voice. "I've got an idea. For the class photo today, we stand next to each other, side by side." Mason blinked in surprise. "Why?" "Think about it," Ethan explained, his voice urgent. "If we're right next to each other, our parents will see how much we look alike. They won't be able to say it's just a coincidence anymore. It'll be proof." Mason considered this, his lips pressing into a thoughtful line. "Do you think they'll finally believe us?" "They have to," Ethan said firmly. "Once they see the photo, they'll have to admit we look exactly the same. And then maybe we can figure out why." Mason's face lit up with excitement. "Okay, I'm in. But how do we make sure we're next to each other?" "Miss Carter's gonna line us up." Ethan grinned mischievously. "Leave that part to me." When recess finally arrived, Ethan and Mason found their usual spot on the playground, beneath the giant oak tree that shaded the far corner. Away from the noise of dodgeball games and swinging kids, the two boys huddled together, their heads bent close as they talked. "I tried to tell my mom about you," Mason confessed, picking at a piece of bark on the tree trunk. "She didn't believe me either. She just laughed and said we must be look-alike buddies." "Same with my parents," Ethan said with a sigh, kicking at the dirt beneath his shoes. "Dad got all weird about it, though, like nervous. He didn't even want to talk about it." Mason looked at him, his expression serious. "Do you think they know something we don't?" Ethan hesitated. The thought had crossed his mind more than once since dinner the night before, but saying it out loud made it feel too big, too real. "I don't know," he said finally, "but I think the photo will help us find out." The two boys sat in silence for a moment, the breeze rustling the leaves above them. The weight of their shared mystery hung between them, unspoken but understood. Suddenly, Mason perked up. "Hey, how are you going to get us next to each other for the picture?" Ethan's grin returned. "I'll ask Miss Carter. She likes me, she'll say yes." "You sure?" "Trust me," Ethan said confidently. When the time came for class photos after lunch, Room 4B was buzzing with energy. Students fussed over their shirts, smoothed their hair, and whispered about who would get to stand in the back row, the cool spot reserved for the taller kids. Miss Carter clapped her hands, her warm voice rising above the chatter. "All right, everyone, line up nicely so we can head to the gym. Remember, big smiles today." Ethan nudged Mason and gave him a quick nod. It was time. As the class began to shuffle into a line, Ethan made a beeline for Miss Carter, flashing his most innocent smile. "Miss Carter?" "Yes, Ethan," she replied, adjusting her glasses as she glanced down at him. "Can Mason and I stand next to each other for the picture? We're best friends, and it would mean a lot," he said sweetly, emphasizing the best friends part. Miss Carter hesitated, her gaze flicking toward Mason, who stood a few feet away. Her eyes narrowed briefly, as if she too noticed how similar the boys looked. "Well, I suppose that's fine. Just make sure you're both on your best behavior." "Thank you," Ethan said, nearly skipping back to Mason with triumph. "It worked." Mason's grin mirrored his own. "Awesome." Inside the gymnasium, the photographer, a tall man with a gray mustache and a booming voice, was busy positioning kids on the risers. "Shorter ones in the front, taller ones in the back. Come on now, let's move quickly." Ethan and Mason slipped into place on the front row, shoulder to shoulder. The photographer paused as he looked at them, his bushy eyebrows knitting together in confusion. "Well now," he muttered, tilting his head, "you two look like twins. Are you brothers?" Ethan and Mason exchanged a quick, conspiratorial glance before shaking their heads. "Nope," Ethan said, grinning. The photographer said, scratching his chin. "Funny thing that." "All right, everyone," he called out, stepping back behind the camera. Eyes forward and big smiles. "On three, 1, 2, 3, cheese." The camera clicked, and Ethan felt a jolt of excitement. This was it. The photo was taken, and soon their parents would see the truth for themselves. He and Mason high-fived quietly as the photographer called for the next class. That afternoon, as the final bell rang, Ethan and Mason walked out of school together, their backpacks bouncing against their shoulders. "Do you think it worked?" Mason asked, his voice hopeful. Ethan grinned. "I know it did. Once they see the picture, they won't be able to ignore it anymore." Mason smiled back, though a hint of worry flickered in his eyes. What if they still don't believe us?" Ethan stopped, turning to face his friend. "Then we'll figure out another way. We're in this together, right?" Mason nodded firmly. "Right." As they headed toward their buses, the sun dipping low on the horizon, neither boy knew just how much that class photo would change their lives. The truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered, one snapshot at a time. The sun had just started its descent when Ethan came bursting through the front door, his backpack bouncing behind him. "Mom! Mom!" he shouted, his voice brimming with excitement. Laura, who had been folding laundry in the living room, nearly dropped a towel as she spun around to see her son dashing toward her, holding something in his hand. "Ethan, slow down. What's got you so worked up?" she asked with a half laugh, though her words were edged with curiosity. Ethan stopped right in front of her, his face flushed and his grin wide. "It's here. The class photo. You have to see it." He practically shoved the glossy sheet into her hands. All right, let me see," Laura said with an amused shake of her head as she adjusted the photo to get a better look. The image was bright and clear, with rows of smiling children lined up neatly. Ethan, as expected, was in the front row. Her eyes instinctively found his messy hair and playful grin. But then Laura froze. Right beside Ethan stood another boy. Same chestnut brown hair, same bright green eyes, same small dimple on the left cheek. The resemblance was so uncanny that it took her breath away. For a moment, she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. She blinked hard, then looked again, but the image didn't change. It was like looking at a mirror image of her son. "Mom, do you see it now?" Ethan asked, bouncing on the balls of his feet. "I told you. Mason looks exactly like me." Laura's mouth went dry. She swallowed hard, trying to find her voice. "Ethan," she began, her tone softer now. "Are you sure this boy's name is Mason? And you're sure you're not cousins? Or something?" Ethan's face scrunched with frustration. "Mom, I've told you 100 times. We're not related." He said his mom doesn't know why we look alike either. It's like we're twins." Laura sat down on the edge of the couch, holding the photo closer to her face. The two boys stood side by side, their identical features practically leaping off the page. Their hair curled at the same angle. Their eyes, wide and sparkling, looked as though they shared the same story. Even the way they smiled. It was uncanny, impossible to ignore. For the first time, a crack formed in Laura's skepticism. She had brushed off Ethan's claims at first, chalking it up to imagination. But now the proof was staring her in the face. "Mom?" Ethan asked hesitantly, his voice pulling her back to the present. Laura looked up at him, her heart pounding. "Sweetie, this is something else," she said softly. "I don't know what to make of it." "Do you believe me now?" he asked, his face alight with hope. Laura hesitated. She wanted to say no, to keep dismissing it as coincidence, but something in her gut told her this was more than that. "I don't know, Ethan. I don't know," she admitted honestly. "But I do think we need to figure this out." Ethan beamed, his confidence restored. "I knew you'd believe me." That night, Laura sat at the dining table long after dinner had ended. The house had gone quiet, with Ethan tucked in a bed and Michael shut away in his study. But Laura couldn't tear herself away from the class photo. She had propped it up against a salt shaker, staring at the two identical boys, the wheels in her mind turning. She couldn't deny it now. The resemblance was far beyond what could be called a coincidence. But how was this possible? Laura thought back to the way Michael had acted the other night when Ethan brought up Mason for the first time. His pale face, his stiff posture, the quickness with which he dismissed the conversation. A chill crept down her spine as doubt took root. Does Michael know something? The thought unsettled her, and yet she couldn't ignore it. If there was any possibility that Michael was keeping something from her, she needed to know the truth. "Laura!" The sudden sound of Michael's voice made her jump. She quickly flipped the photo face down as her husband appeared in the doorway, a mug of tea in his hand. "You're still up?" he asked, frowning slightly as he crossed the room. Laura forced a small smile. Yeah, just couldn't sleep. Too much on my mind. Michael sat across from her, sipping his tea. Everything okay? She hesitated, debating whether to show him the photo. It's about Ethan, she said carefully, watching for his reaction. He's been talking a lot about this boy Mason at school. Michael's face remained neutral, though his grip on the mug tightened just slightly. Yeah, I remember. His twin, right? Yes, Laura replied, studying him closely. The class photo came today. Michael froze mid-sip, his expression flickering for just a moment before he quickly masked it. Oh, and Laura's pulse quickened. And you should see it. There's no denying it, Michael. Mason and Ethan look exactly alike. It's unnerving. Michael set his mug down a little too hard. Laura, kids look alike all the time. You're probably just overthinking it. Overthinking it? Laura repeated, her voice sharper than she'd intended. Michael, I'm telling you this isn't normal. The resemblance is exact. It's like looking at two copies of the same child. Michael looked away, his jaw tight. It's just a coincidence, he muttered, though his tone lacked conviction. Let it go, Laura. Let it go, she shot back, anger rising now. How can I let it go when there's clearly something going on here? Why are you acting so strange about this? I'm not acting strange, Michael snapped, his voice a little too loud. I just think you're making a big deal out of nothing. Laura stared at him, stunned by his sudden outburst. He looked away again, avoiding her gaze. For a long moment, the room was silent, tension crackling between them. Finally, Michael stood abruptly, picking up his mug. I'm going to bed, he said gruffly, walking toward the stairs. Laura watched him go, her heart heavy. His reaction only deepened her suspicions. He was hiding something, she was sure of it. Once she heard the bedroom door close upstairs, Laura pulled the photo back out, her fingers trembling. She glanced toward the darkened hallway, as though expecting Michael to reappear, then picked up her phone. Scrolling through her contacts, she found the number for Oakwood Elementary and hovered her thumb over the call button. She needed answers, and if Michael wouldn't give them to her, she'd start looking elsewhere. I'll call the school tomorrow, she decided, placing the photo gently on the table. Her gaze lingered on Ethan's smiling face and the identical boy beside him. Whatever this was, it couldn't stay hidden forever. Laura would find out the truth, no matter what it took. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, but Laura barely noticed. The uneaten toast on her plate had gone cold as she stared at the class photo once more. Ethan's face, so familiar and bright, stared back at her. But it was Mason's identical smile beside him that kept her heart pounding. Michael had left early for work without saying much, his demeanor still guarded after their argument the night before. Laura didn't push him. She knew pressing him in that moment would get her nowhere. Instead, she turned her focus to finding answers herself. She glanced at the clock. Oakwood Elementary's office opens at 8. Determined, she picked up her phone and dialed the number she'd saved the night before. Good morning, Oakwood Elementary, this is Mary speaking. How can I help you? Laura cleared her throat, gripping the phone tightly. Hi, this is Laura Hayes, Ethan Hayes' mother. I was wondering if I could get contact information for another student's parent. His name is Mason Parker. There was a pause. I'm sorry, Mrs. Hayes, but we can't give out personal information about our students or their families. Laura's stomach sank. I understand that, but it's important. Our sons look remarkably alike, and I really need to speak with Mason's mom. Could you maybe pass along my contact information to her? The receptionist hesitated, clearly considering the request. I can do that, Mrs. Hayes. If Mason's mother is comfortable, she'll reach out to you. That's all I ask. Thank you so much, Laura replied, a wave of relief washing over her as she hung up. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Hours crawled by as Laura distracted herself with chores that didn't really need doing. She hovered near her phone, jumping each time it buzzed with a message or email, only to feel her heart drop when it wasn't the call she was waiting for. Finally, just after lunch, her phone rang. Unknown number. She snatched it up, her voice hopeful. Hello. Hi, is this Laura Hayes? A soft, hesitant voice asked on the other end. Yes, this is Laura. Hi, this is Anna Parker. I was told you wanted to talk to me about Mason. Laura exhaled shakily, steadying herself. Yes. Thank you for calling me, Anna. I know this might seem strange, but it's about our sons. I think we need to meet. Anna paused, as though weighing her words. Me? What's this about, exactly? Laura swallowed, trying to find the right words. Mason and Ethan, they look exactly alike. Not just a little similar, it's like they're twins. I saw the class photo, and I can't ignore it. I don't know what this means, but I feel like we need to talk. There was a long silence on the other end, but then Anna sighed softly. I've noticed it too, she admitted. Mason came home talking about Ethan, and I thought he was exaggerating. But when I saw the photo, I couldn't believe my eyes. I've been trying to make sense of it. Laura felt a mixture of relief and trepidation. Would you be willing to meet? Maybe we can figure this out together. Yes, I think that's a good idea, Anna agreed. There's a coffee shop called the Daily Bean on Maple Avenue. Can you meet me there around 3 p.m.? Absolutely. I'll see you there, Laura said, her voice firm despite the nervous flutter in her chest. The Daily Bean was a quiet, cozy cafe tucked between a florist and a small bookstore. Its large windows let in soft afternoon light, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the air. Laura arrived early, her nerves on edge. She dressed simply, jeans and a cardigan, but couldn't stop smoothing her hands over her sleeves as she waited. She spotted Anna the moment she walked in. Anna was petite, with curly dark hair and kind brown eyes. She scanned the cafe, uncertainly, before locking eyes with Laura. Offering a tentative smile, Anna approached, holding a canvas tote bag close to her side. Laura, she asked softly. Laura stood, extending her hand. Anna, thank you for meeting me. They settled into a small table near the window, and Laura wasted no time. She pulled out the class photo, sliding it across the table. This is what started all of this. Anna's expression softened as she looked at the image, lingering on the two boys who might as well have been reflections of each other. It's like looking at the same child twice, she murmured. Laura nodded. I couldn't believe it either. Anna looked up, her eyes searching. Laura, there's something you should know. Mason, he's adopted. Laura's breath caught. Adopted? Yes, Anna said quietly. My husband and I adopted him when he was just a few weeks old. The agency didn't give us much information about his birth family, just that he was healthy and in need of a home. I never questioned it until now. Laura leaned back in her chair, trying to process what Anna had just said. But that doesn't make sense. If he's adopted, how is it possible that he looks exactly like Ethan? Anna's gaze was steady, though uncertainty flickered in her eyes. That's what I've been asking myself. I don't have answers, Laura. But there's no denying what we're seeing. Laura's thoughts swirled as she stared down at the photo. Her mind flashed back to Michael's strange behavior, his nervousness, his refusal to talk about Mason. The pieces didn't add up, but her gut told her that something was very, very wrong. Anna, Laura said carefully, her voice low, I need to ask you something. Did the adoption agency tell you anything at all, about Mason's birth parents? Anna shook her head. Not really. Just that the adoption was closed and all records were sealed. I didn't push for more details back then. Mason was our miracle, and that's all we cared about. Laura's heart ached at the sincerity in Anna's voice, but it also deepened her suspicions. Do you still have any paperwork? Something we could look at? Anna hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with the handle of her coffee cup. I have a file at home, but it's very limited. I don't think it will tell us much. Anything would help, Laura said firmly. Because, Anna, I can't shake the feeling that my husband knows something he's not telling me. Anna looked at her sharply. You think your husband knows? Laura nodded slowly, her stomach twisting. He's been acting strange ever since Ethan brought Mason up. He avoids the subject, and when I showed him the photo, he got defensive. I can't ignore it anymore. Anna sat back, her expression thoughtful. Then we need to dig deeper. If Mason and Ethan really are twins, we deserve to know the truth. Laura exhaled, her resolve hardening. I agree. Let's meet again soon. Bring the file. I'll figure out my side too. Anna smiled faintly, her determination mirroring Laura's. We'll figure this out together. As they stood to leave, Laura felt the weight of the situation settle squarely on her shoulders. The truth was out there, and she was determined to uncover it. But she couldn't shake the fear that once the answers came to light, nothing in their lives would ever be the same again. Laura awoke early the next morning, the edges of her sleep frayed by restless dreams. Michael had already left the house, earlier than usual, which wasn't like him. She stared at his empty side of the bed, unease swirling in her stomach like a storm cloud. The events of the last few days weighed heavily on her mind. Ethan's insistence, the undeniable resemblance in the class photo, and her conversation with Anna. Then there was Michael's strange behavior. The way he had avoided the subject of Mason altogether and refused to look her in the eye. Laura couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was wrong. As she stood in the kitchen sipping her coffee, her phone buzzed with a message. It was Anna. Anna, I found Mason's adoption file. Let's meet soon. Laura typed back quickly. Let's do it this afternoon. I'm going to visit the adoption center myself first. Anna's reply came almost instantly. Be careful. Let me know what happens. Laura set the phone down, her resolve hardening. She was done waiting for answers. Later that morning, Laura drove Ethan to school, giving him an extra tight hug before he ran off to join his friends. See you later, sweetie, she called, masking the turmoil she felt inside. With Ethan safe at school, Laura made a detour. Her plan was simple: drive past Michael's office building to confirm he was where he said he'd be. She hated feeling like this, snooping, doubting her own husband, but she couldn't shake the gnawing suspicion that he was keeping something from her. The office was a 15-minute drive from their home, but when she pulled up across the street, her stomach sank. Michael's car wasn't in its usual parking spot. Frowning, Laura turned the wheel and drove on, scanning the roads as she went. Maybe he had a meeting somewhere, she reasoned, until she spotted his familiar dark blue sedan parked near the Willow Hill Adoption Center. Her heart skipped a beat. What on earth are you doing here? She whispered to herself. Laura pulled into a space a block away and watched. Moments later, Michael emerged from the adoption center's doors, his head lowered as he spoke on the phone. He glanced over his shoulder as if to make sure no one saw him before climbing into his car and pulling away. Laura's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her pulse racing. Why would Michael be at an adoption center? What was he trying to hide? She waited a moment to gather herself, then opened her car door and headed toward the building. The reception area of the Willow Hill Adoption Center was small but tidy, with pastel walls and shelves filled with brochures about adoption and foster care. A young woman with a tight ponytail sat behind the desk, her friendly smile faltering slightly as Laura approached. Good morning, Laura began, trying to keep her voice calm. I need to ask a few questions about an adoption. It's really important. The receptionist's smile returned, though her eyes were guarded. Of course. Do you have an appointment? No, I don't, Laura admitted, leaning slightly against the desk. But I think he might have a sibling who was adopted from here. I just need some information. The receptionist's face stiffened ever so slightly. I'm sorry, ma'am, but adoption records are sealed for privacy reasons. I can't disclose that kind of information. Laura's frustration bubbled to the surface. Please, I'm not asking for specifics. I just need to know if a boy named Mason Parker was adopted here about 10 years ago. It's a matter of family. The receptionist looked nervous now, glancing over her shoulder toward a closed door at the back of the office. I'm really sorry, but I can't help you. Laura's brow furrowed. Who's back there? She asked sharply. No one you need to speak with, the woman replied too quickly. Laura opened her mouth to press further when another door creaked open, and an older man with graying hair stepped into the room. He wore a crisp suit and held a folder close to his chest. Is there a problem here? The receptionist shot him a nervous look. This woman is asking about a specific adoption. I told her we couldn't help. The man's gaze fixed on Laura, his expression unreadable. Ma'am, I assure you, we cannot release any information without proper legal channels. You'll need to leave. Laura clenched her fists at her sides. Everything about their behavior screamed secrecy, and she couldn't shake the feeling that Michael had something to do with it. Fine, she said stiffly, but I'll be back. She turned on her heel and walked out, her mind spinning. That afternoon, Laura met Anna at her home. Anna's living room was small but cozy, with family photos lining the shelves. Mason's bright smile appeared in many of them, and Laura's heart tugged knowing how connected he was to her Ethan. Anna handed Laura a folder as they sat down on the couch. "This is everything I have. It's not much, but maybe you'll see something I missed." Laura opened the file and scanned its contents. There were adoption forms, a certificate, and a few medical notes. But Anna was right. There wasn't much information about Mason's biological parents. One thing, however, caught Laura's attention. Date of birth, October 14th. Laura's breath caught in her throat. "That's Ethan's birthday," she whispered. Anna's eyes widened. "Are you serious?" Laura nodded, her fingers trembling. "It's the same exact day." The two women sat in stunned silence for a moment before Anna spoke again. "There's only one way to know for sure." Laura looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" "A DNA test," Anna said firmly. "We can compare Mason and Ethan's DNA. If they're twins, the test will confirm it." Laura hesitated. "I don't want to put Ethan through anything unnecessary." What if she trailed off? The weight of the truth pressing down on her. Anna reached out and squeezed her hand. "Laura, we deserve answers. And so do the boys." Laura exhaled shakily and nodded. "You're right. Let's do it." The following day, Laura told Ethan they were visiting the doctor for a routine checkup. He grumbled a little but didn't argue, his trust in his mother absolute. Anna did the same with Mason, meeting Laura at a small clinic outside of town. The nurse who took the boys' cheek swabs was cheerful and kind, reassuring them it was just a quick, painless test. Ethan and Mason sat side by side in the waiting room afterward, swinging their legs and whispering to each other about what kind of ice cream they'd get as a reward. Laura and Anna sat in silence, exchanging nervous glances. The weight of the moment was impossible to ignore. As the boys laughed softly in their corner of the room, Laura's gaze lingered on Ethan's familiar smile, so identical to Mason's. A chill ran down her spine as the reality of what they were doing settled in. If the test came back positive, it would confirm what her heart already suspected. Ethan and Mason were twins, separated at birth. And if that were true, the next question loomed large and heavy. What else was Michael hiding? The days following the DNA test were a blur. Every tick of the clock seemed louder than usual, every passing hour more suffocating than the last. Laura couldn't stop glancing at her phone, waiting for the clinic to call with the results. Anna had been just as on edge, texting updates throughout the day, though neither of them had anything new to share. Ethan and Mason remained blissfully unaware of the tension simmering beneath the surface. They laughed and played as if the world wasn't tilting beneath their mother's feet, their bond growing stronger with every interaction. Laura sat at the kitchen table that afternoon, pretending to sort through bills as her mind drifted again. What if the test is positive? She thought. What if Michael really knew about this the whole time? Just then, her phone buzzed, startling her so much that she nearly knocked over her glass of water. She grabbed it quickly and stared at the screen. Unknown caller. Her heart pounded. She pressed the green button and held the phone to her ear. "Hello? Is this Laura Hayes?" A woman's voice asked politely. "Yes," Laura answered, her voice trembling slightly. "This is Nurse Miller from the Everwood Clinic. Your test results are in. Would you like me to review them over the phone, or would you prefer to come in?" Laura swallowed hard, her fingers gripping the edge of the table for support. "No, please just tell me now." There was a pause, as if the nurse were preparing herself. The results show a 99.9% match between the two samples. Ethan and Mason are genetically identical twins. The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy and unrelenting. Laura felt as though the world had tilted, the ground crumbling beneath her. "Thank you," she whispered faintly, unable to say anything more. "You're welcome, Mrs. Hayes. Let us know if you need any follow-up support." The line went dead, and Laura set the phone down slowly. Her hands trembled, and a wave of nausea rolled over her. It's true, she thought. They're twins. The air in the kitchen felt too thick to breathe. Laura pressed her palms against her face, trying to steady herself. But the rush of emotions was too much. Shock, disbelief, betrayal. and an aching sadness she couldn't name. How could this happen? And why had it happened? Her mind swirled with questions that only one person could answer. Michael. Michael returned home late that evening, the house unusually quiet. Ethan was upstairs, likely reading or playing on his tablet, and Laura sat on the couch, the DNA results resting on the coffee table in front of her. As Michael stepped into the living room, loosening his tie, he paused at the sight of Laura. Something about her posture, still, tense, and cold, made his footsteps falter. "Hey," he said cautiously. "Everything okay?" Laura didn't look at him. "Sit down." "Michael." Michael blinked, a flicker of confusion passing across his face. "What's this about?" "Sit down," she repeated, her voice sharp enough to cut through the air. Michael hesitated, but obeyed, lowering himself onto the armchair across from her. His gaze flicked to the paper on the table. "What's that?" Laura finally lifted her head, her eyes red-rimmed but steely. "It's the DNA test results. I had Ethan and Mason tested." Michael froze. The color drained from his face, his shoulders stiffening as if bracing for impact. "What?" "You heard me," Laura said, her voice trembling with controlled anger. "Ethan and Mason are identical twins." "Twins, Michael. They share 99.9% of their DNA. Michael's mouth opened slightly, but no words came. He stared at her as if trying to decide whether to deny it, but Laura wasn't about to give him the chance. "Don't lie to me," she snapped, her voice rising now. "I know you've been hiding something. You've been acting strange since Ethan first mentioned Mason. And then I saw you at the Willow Hill Adoption Center. You told me you were at work, Michael. What were you doing there?" Michael's hands gripped the arms of the chair, his knuckles white. "Laura, listen." "No," she shouted, standing up abruptly. "No more excuses. No more lies. You're going to tell me the truth right now. Or so help me, I will never forgive you for this." The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Finally, Michael let out a shaky breath, his face crumpling under the weight of whatever he'd been carrying. "Laura," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "I'm so sorry." Her heart clenched painfully, but she stood firm. "Sorry for what?" "Michael?" "Start talking." Michael ran a hand through his hair, his expression a mixture of guilt and anguish. "It's true. Ethan, he isn't our biological son." The room seemed to spin. "What?" Laura choked out. Michael buried his face in his hands for a moment before looking up, tears glistening in his eyes. "When you gave birth to Ethan, there were complications," he began. "You were unconscious, Laura. You don't remember. Our baby didn't make it." Laura's knees felt weak. "What do you mean didn't make it?" "Michael, what are you saying?" "I was devastated," Michael said, his voice breaking. "I didn't know how to tell you. I thought it would destroy you. But while I was at the hospital, I overheard a nurse talking about a set of twins who had just been born, unwanted, up for adoption. I don't know what came over me, but I made a choice." Laura stumbled backward, pressing a hand to her chest. "You chose to adopt one of them without telling me?" Michael nodded miserably. "Yes. I thought I was protecting you, Laura. You were so weak, and I couldn't bear to see you suffer. I told myself that raising one of those twins would heal us, that you'd never have to know." Tears streamed down Laura's face as she struggled to process his confession. "And Mason? I didn't know what happened to the other twin," Michael admitted. "I assumed he was adopted by another family, but I never imagined we'd cross paths like this." Laura sank onto the couch, her entire body trembling. "You had no right, Michael. No right to keep this from me. You let me believe Ethan was mine. Ours. You built our family on a lie." Michael moved to kneel in front of her, his voice desperate. "I know I messed up, Laura. I thought I was doing the right thing. I love Ethan as if he were our own, because he is our son in every way that matters." Laura looked into his tear-streaked face, her heart shattering all over again. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to make him feel the pain she felt. But all she could do was sit there, staring at the man she thought she knew, wondering how everything had gone so terribly wrong. "I don't know if I can forgive you for this," she whispered. Michael bowed his head, his shoulders shaking. I understand. But please, Laura, don't let this change the way you see Ethan. He's still the same boy you've loved all these years. Laura's tears fell harder. She knew Michael was right about one thing. Ethan was her son. Her love for him hadn't changed. But now, the truth lay between them like a chasm, and she had no idea how to bridge it. The only thing she knew for certain was that their lives would never be the same again. The silence in the living room stretched like an eternity. Michael remained on the floor, his shoulders slumped, his head bowed, while Laura sat frozen on the couch. Her tear-streaked face a portrait of shock and grief. The confession replayed in her mind like a broken record. Our baby didn't make it. I adopted Ethan without telling you. It didn't feel real. How could you do this? Laura's voice finally broke the silence, hoarse and raw. How could you keep something like this from me for 10 years, Michael? Michael looked up, his eyes red-rimmed, pleading. I thought I was protecting you, Laura. I was so scared of what losing the baby would do to you. When you woke up, you were so weak, so fragile. I couldn't bear to tell you. Laura shook her head, her hands trembling in her lap. So, your solution was to lie to me? To bring home someone else's baby and pretend nothing happened? Did you think I wouldn't love him unless I thought he was ours? No, Michael choked out. That's not it at all. I knew you'd love him. You have the biggest heart of anyone I know. But I was afraid. Afraid of what the truth would do to us, to our family. I made the decision in the moment, and I've been trying to live with it ever since. Laura stood suddenly, pacing the room as emotions warred inside her. Rage, sorrow, confusion, but also an undeniable love for Ethan, a love that hadn't wavered despite the truth. She paused, staring hard at Michael. You made that choice for me. You stole my chance to grieve, to understand what happened. I can't even mourn my own child because you replaced him with another and didn't tell me. Michael flinched at her words, tears streaming down his face. I know I messed up, Laura. I have lived with that guilt every single day. You should have told me, Laura said, her voice cracking. I had a right to know the truth, no matter how painful it was. Michael's shoulders sagged, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound in the house was the faint hum of the fridge and the ticking of the wall clock. Laura's eyes eventually landed on the class photo sitting on the coffee table, the one that had torn open their lives. She picked it up and traced her finger over Ethan's smiling face. My son. It didn't matter where he came from. The boy in the photo was hers. She had raised him, kissed his scraped knees, cheered him on at school plays. He was the center of her world. And yet, Laura turned back to Michael, her expression softer now, but still pained. I love Ethan, she whispered. Nothing will ever change that. But you've broken something in us, Michael. How can I trust you again after this? Michael got to his feet, wiping his face with his sleeve. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. I don't know if I deserve it. But Laura, please don't let this tear us apart. Don't let it change how you feel about Ethan. He needs you. We need you. Laura felt her heart ache as she looked at her husband, broken and ashamed, yet still the man she had built a life with. She didn't know if their relationship could ever be the same. But one thing she did know was that her love for Ethan was unwavering. She sank back onto the couch, tears still trickling down her face. I need time, Michael, she said quietly. Time to process this, to figure out what happens next. But for now, you need to be honest with me. No more lies. Michael nodded solemnly. No more lies. I swear it. That night, after tucking Ethan into bed, Laura lingered in his doorway, watching him sleep. He looked so peaceful, his chest rising and falling in a slow rhythm, his favorite stuffed bear tucked under one arm. She stepped into the room and sat on the edge of his bed, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. Ethan stirred slightly, blinking up at her with sleepy eyes. Mom, he mumbled. Hey, sweetie, she whispered, forcing a soft smile. I didn't mean to wake you. It's okay, Ethan replied, yawning. What's wrong? Laura felt her throat tighten. How could she explain to him what was happening? How could she tell him the truth without shaking the foundation of his world? Instead, she leaned down and pressed a kiss to his forehead. Nothing's wrong, baby. I just love you so much. and I wanted to see you. I love you too, Mom. Ethan murmured, his eyes fluttering closed again. Laura stayed there for a long time, listening to his quiet breathing. He was her son. No matter where he'd come from, no matter what secrets had been kept. Love is what makes a family, she reminded herself. Not biology. The next morning, Laura found herself at Anna's front door, clutching a travel mug of coffee and a folder in her other hand. Anna opened the door with a small smile, though the tension in her expression was unmistakable. "Come in," Anna said, stepping aside. The two women sat at Anna's kitchen table, Mason's cheerful laughter drifting in from the backyard where he played with his dog. Laura glanced toward the window, spotting Mason's familiar mop of brown hair, so like Ethan's. Her heart clenched. "I got the results," Laura said quietly, breaking the silence. Anna's eyes widened, her breath catching. "And?" Laura swallowed hard. "They're twins. Identical twins." The test confirmed it. Anna leaned back in her chair, one hand covering her mouth as she absorbed the news. "Oh my God," she whispered. "I thought so, but hearing it confirmed feels unreal." Laura nodded. "It is unreal. But now that we know the truth, I think we need to figure out what's best for the boys." Anna looked at her sharply. "Do you think we should tell them?" Laura hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of the folder. "Not yet. They're so young, and this will change everything for them. I think we need to take this slowly. Let them adjust." Anna nodded, though she looked conflicted. "You're probably right. But Laura, what about Michael? Does he know?" Laura's jaw tightened. "He knows," she said softly. "He told me everything. Ethan was adopted after our biological baby didn't make it." Anna's expression softened. "I can't imagine how hard that must be for you." Laura let out a shaky breath. "I'm angry, Anna. Angry and hurt. But I can't let that affect the boys. They deserve to know each other, to have a relationship. And I want to do this the right way." Anna reached out and placed a hand over Laura's. "We'll figure it out together. For them." Laura nodded, her resolve hardening. Ethan and Mason had been separated by circumstances neither of them could control. But they had a chance now, a chance to build a bond that had been stolen from them. "I want to start with playdates," Laura said. "Let them spend time together, get to know each other naturally. No pressure, no big reveals yet. Just time." Anna smiled faintly. "I think that's a great idea." As they sat together, the weight of the situation hung heavy between them. But there was also a sense of hope, a hope that, despite the lies and betrayals, they could forge something beautiful from the truth. In the backyard, Mason's laughter echoed through the air, and Laura smiled faintly, thinking of Ethan. They were brothers, even if they didn't know it yet. And no matter what came next, she would fight to protect them both. The days following the revelation were a delicate dance of emotions, decisions, and careful steps forward. For Laura, it felt like trying to piece together a broken vase, each shard sharp and fragile. But she wasn't willing to let everything shatter completely. The truth was out now, and though it had nearly torn her apart, it also brought clarity. Ethan and Mason were brothers, identical twins, and no matter what had happened, it was her job to protect and nurture this newfound connection. Anna had become a pillar of support. What had started as a cautious alliance between two mothers had quickly blossomed into a bond rooted in shared purpose. The two women spoke daily, coordinating the boys' time together while navigating the complicated emotions that came with it. One sunny Saturday morning, the first official playdate was set. Laura stood in her kitchen, arranging a tray of snacks, carrot sticks, apple slices, and peanut butter sandwiches, while Ethan bounced around the room like a human pinball. "Mom, is Mason coming soon?" Ethan asked for the third time in 5 minutes. Laura smiled, though her heart fluttered nervously. "Yes, sweetie. Anna texted me. They're on their way. You need to settle down a little." "I can't," Ethan exclaimed, his grin wide. "It's like having a brother. I've never had a brother before." Laura paused, her chest tightening at his words. A brother. He said it so simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And for him, it was. Mason already felt like a piece of him that had just been missing. Before she could respond, the doorbell rang. Ethan took off down the hallway, shouting, "I'll get it!" Laura followed, wiping her hands on a dish towel. When she reached the door, Ethan had already thrown it open. There stood Mason, beaming, with Anna right behind him. Mason called, matching Ethan's excitement. "Come on, let's go to the backyard." Ethan grabbed Mason's hand and tugged him through the house without a second thought, their matching sneakers thumping against the hardwood floor. Laura and Anna exchanged an amused look before stepping inside. "They're like magnets," Anna said softly, setting her purse down by the entryway. Laura smiled, though her throat tightened. It's like they've known each other their whole lives. In the backyard, the boys were already deep into a game of tag, shrieking with laughter as they darted around the yard. From her seat on the patio, Laura watched them, Mason's dimpled smile mirroring Ethan's perfectly. The way their movements mirrored each other's almost instinctively. It was both beautiful and bittersweet. "They look so happy," Anna said, sitting beside her with 2 cups of tea. Laura nodded, her gaze fixed on the boys. "They really do." It's like something clicked for both of them. They didn't question it, they just accepted it. Anna exhaled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Sometimes I think kids understand love better than we do. They don't worry about the details. They just feel." Laura's heart softened at the truth of Anna's words. The boys' bond was undeniable, a natural rhythm that had only been paused, not broken, by the years apart. Anna shifted slightly, glancing at Laura. "How are things with Michael?" Laura sighed, her shoulders slumping. "It's complicated. I still feel so betrayed, but at the same time I know why he did it. He wasn't trying to hurt me. He thought he was saving me, protecting me. I just don't know if I'll ever be able to fully forgive him." Anna nodded thoughtfully. "It's going to take time, but the fact that you're still trying to understand him says a lot. You're stronger than you realize." Laura smiled faintly. "Some days I feel strong. Other days I feel like I'm drowning. But then I look at Ethan and Mason, and I realize I can't let my anger cloud what's really important." Anna reached over and squeezed Laura's hand. "You're doing the best you can, Laura. And it's enough. We're in this together now for them." The playdates quickly became a regular occurrence. Every weekend, Ethan and Mason would spend hours together, building forts out of couch cushions, racing bikes up and down the driveway, and inventing imaginary adventures that spanned galaxies. Laura and Anna watched as the boys grew closer with each passing day. The similarities between them extended beyond their looks, their mannerisms, their humor. Even the way they finished each other's sentences as though they had spent every day of their lives side by side. It was as if time had no hold on their bond. One Sunday afternoon, as the boys sprawled on the living room floor drawing superheroes with crayons, Michael quietly entered the house. He paused in the doorway, watching Ethan and Mason laugh over their drawings. Laura looked up from the couch and saw him standing there, his face a mixture of sadness and awe. "Michael," she said softly, drawing his attention. He stepped into the room, his voice barely above a whisper. "They look so happy." Laura studied his expression. She hadn't forgiven him completely. Trust, once broken, wasn't easily rebuilt. But seeing him there, vulnerable and full of regret, something inside her softened. "They deserve to be happy," she said gently. Michael sat down beside her, his eyes still on the boys. "I've been so afraid, Laura. Afraid of losing you. Of losing us. But I see them now, and I realize I robbed them of years they should have had together. And I robbed you of the truth." Laura sighed, her gaze flicking to Ethan, his face glowing with joy. "You made a mistake, Michael. A huge one. But I'm trying to see past it. Because this isn't about us anymore. It's about them." Michael turned to her, his voice breaking. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right. I promise." For the first time in weeks, Laura didn't pull away. Instead, she reached for his hand. "We'll figure it out. But no more secrets. Michael. Ever. Never again," he vowed, gripping her hand tightly. As the weeks turned into months, the bond between the two families grew stronger. What had begun as an earth-shattering revelation slowly transformed into something beautiful, an extended family. Holidays were spent together, the dining table filled with laughter and shared stories. Ethan and Mason were inseparable, two halves of a whole, finally reunited. They played together, argued like brothers, and made up just as quickly. One evening, as Laura tucked Ethan into bed, he looked up at her with sleepy eyes. "Mom." "Yes, sweetheart? Do you think Mason and I were always meant to find each other?" Laura's heart swelled, tears stinging her eyes. She leaned down and kissed his forehead. "Yes, Ethan, I think you were." "Good," Ethan murmured, yawning. "Because he's the best brother ever." Laura smiled, watching him drift off to sleep. In that quiet moment, she felt a peace she hadn't known in weeks. The truth had been painful, but it had also brought healing, love, and new beginnings. Family, Laura realized, wasn't about perfection. It wasn't defined by biology or secrets. Family was about love, forgiveness, and choosing to move forward together. And that was exactly what they were doing. The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden streaks of light through the wide windows of Anna's home. Inside, the dining room buzzed with the sounds of clinking dishes, bursts of laughter, and the joyful chatter of two little boys who had found in each other something irreplaceable, a bond that transcended time and circumstance. Laura paused for a moment in the doorway, taking it all in. Anna was busy at the stove, humming to herself as she stirred a simmering pot. Michael was helping set the table, his movements careful and deliberate, as though he understood the fragility of this hard-won peace. And in the center of the room, Ethan and Mason sat cross-legged on the floor, trading Pokemon cards and giggling like they'd been best friends since birth. It was such a simple, ordinary scene, and yet it wasn't ordinary at all. This moment, this gathering, was the result of a journey filled with heartbreak, betrayal, forgiveness, and healing. A journey that had taught Laura lessons she would carry for the rest of her life. "Dinner's ready," Anna called cheerfully, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. The boys scrambled to their feet, racing each other to the table as Michael and Laura exchanged a knowing smile. Ethan grabbed Mason's hand before they sat down, the simple gesture so natural and yet profoundly meaningful. "Let's sit together, Mason," Ethan exclaimed. "You always say that," Mason teased, nudging him playfully. "Well, we are twins," Ethan replied, grinning. "We've got to stick together." Anna laughed softly as she brought the final dish to the table. "You two are inseparable, aren't you?" "Forever," Mason said firmly, his green eyes sparkling with certainty. Laura's heart swelled as she took her seat next to Michael, who pulled her chair out for her, a small gesture of gratitude and care. There had been a time, not long ago, when she couldn't imagine sharing a table with him again. But here they were, united in ways she hadn't thought possible. As the meal unfolded, the room was filled with warmth. Conversation flowed easily. Ethan and Mason launched into stories about school, describing how they'd played pranks on their classmates, finishing each other's sentences as they often did. And then Mrs. Thompson said, "Who put frogs in the art room?" Ethan exclaimed, barely able to contain his laughter. And we just sat there, pretending we knew nothing. Mason added, his grin wide. "You two are troublemakers," Anna teased, though her eyes shone with pride. Michael chuckled, shaking his head. "They've got a good team going, that's for sure." The table fell quiet for a moment, and Laura caught Anna's eye. Both women shared a knowing look, a silent acknowledgement of how far they'd come. Two mothers, once strangers, now partners in navigating this complex and beautiful reality for their sons. Laura raised her glass, clearing her throat gently. "I just want to say how grateful I am for this moment, for family in all its forms." Anna smiled and lifted her glass too. "To family?" she echoed. "To family," the boys shouted, raising their juice glasses high. After dinner, the boys ran off to play outside, their laughter echoing through the yard. Anna and Laura sat together on the porch, cradling steaming mugs of tea, while Michael lingered inside, tidying up the kitchen. "They're so happy," Anna said softly, watching as Mason and Ethan chased each other under the twilight sky. "I think they always knew they belonged together." Laura nodded, her gaze lingering on Ethan. I think so too. It's like a missing piece of them snapped into place. Anna looked at her carefully. Are you holding up, Laura? Really? Laura exhaled deeply, her hands warming around the ceramic mug. It's been hard. There's no sugarcoating it. I've had to come to terms with so much. Michael's lie, the stillbirth, the idea that Ethan isn't biologically mine. Anna didn't interrupt, simply letting her continue. But, Laura said slowly, her voice softening, through all of this, I've realized that biology doesn't define love. I've spent the last 10 years raising Ethan, watching him grow, celebrating his victories, comforting him when he's hurt. That's what makes me his mother. Anna's eyes misted as she reached out to squeeze Laura's hand. That's beautiful. And true. Laura smiled faintly. It doesn't mean I'm not angry at Michael. I am. But I've also started to forgive him. He made a terrible choice, but he did it because he was trying to protect me. And, in a strange way, that choice brought Ethan into my life. Anna nodded, her expression thoughtful. Sometimes the most complicated circumstances bring us the greatest blessings. Laura looked out at the yard, where Ethan and Mason had collapsed into the grass, pointing up at the stars that had begun to blink awake. Ethan is my greatest blessing. So is Mason. And so are you, Anna. I don't think I could have done this without you. Anna smiled warmly. We're in this together, Laura. Always. As the evening drew to a close, Ethan and Mason reluctantly said their goodbyes, exchanging their usual promise. See you soon, okay? Ethan said, hugging Mason tightly. Of course. We've got more adventures to plan, Mason replied with a grin. Laura watched as they hugged, her heart full. She thought of all the time they'd lost, years spent apart, not knowing the other existed. But she also realized how lucky they were to have found each other again. As they climbed into the car, Ethan glanced back at Mason and waved. Bye, Mason. Laura smiled softly. Did you have fun today? Yeah, Ethan replied, his voice sleepy but happy. I think Mason and I were always meant to be brothers. Laura's chest swelled with emotion. I think so, too, sweetheart. That night, after tucking Ethan into bed, Laura sat by the window, gazing up at the moonlit sky. The house was quiet now, save for the faint hum of crickets outside. This journey, filled with its pain, confusion, and heartbreak, had also brought incredible joy. She thought back to the early days of doubt, to the unbearable weight of Michael's betrayal, and to the fear of what the truth might bring. But in the end, love had prevailed. Laura realized now that family wasn't defined by perfect circumstances. Families were messy, complicated, and often born from unexpected events. But it was love, unconditional and enduring, that held them together. She had learned to forgive, not just Michael, but herself for doubting her strength. And she had learned that sometimes the hardest moments in life lead to the most beautiful new beginnings. Outside, the stars glittered against the dark expanse, reminding her that even in the darkest times, light could always be found. With that thought, Laura smiled and whispered softly to herself, "Love is what makes a family." As the stars continued to shine brightly over the quiet neighborhood, Ethan and Mason's laughter echoed in Laura's memory, a reminder of how life can bring unexpected miracles even through its challenges. Their journey was not just about uncovering a truth, but about healing, forgiveness, and the powerful bond of family. And now, it's your turn to reflect. What would you do if you discovered you had a long-lost twin sibling? Would you search for them, embrace the bond, or try to uncover the secrets that kept you apart? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your story. If you enjoyed this heartfelt tale, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. There are many more inspiring and emotional stories waiting for you. Stories that will touch your heart and remind you of the beauty of human connection. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.